Abandoned by his mother, he finds a cave in the forest. But something there changes everything. Caleb woke up alone on the cold bench of the town square, wrapped only in a torn blanket that smelled of rain. His 8 years seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime when he opened his eyes on that freezing January morning and couldn't find his mother, Sarah, anywhere. That's when he saw the crumpled note under his small cloth backpack. In the shaky handwriting he knew so well, the words that changed everything. "My son, Mummy can't take care of you anymore, forgive me." The paper trembled in his small hands as he read and reread it, hoping the words would change, that this was just a bad dream. Caleb looked around the square he knew so well. It was there that he and his mother came every afternoon after they lost their home. It was there that she managed to get some change by washing car windshields or asking passers-by for help. It was there that they had slept for 3 weeks, ever since the landlord had evicted them from the little room in the back of the boarding house. The boy put the note in the pocket of his worn shirt and adjusted the backpack strap on his shoulder. Inside it, only a change of clothes, a photo of him with his mother in better times, and a small, faded teddy bear he had gotten for his last birthday. His bare feet touched the cold pavement as he stood up, determined not to accept that goodbye. During the first days, Caleb remained in the square, convinced that Sarah would return. He knew every bench, every tree, every corner where they used to shelter from the rain. He talked to the other homeless people, asking if anyone had seen his mother. Mrs. Higgins, a grey-haired lady who sold candy on the corner, was the one who gave him the first clues. "Yesterday morning early I saw her leaving here, boy. She looked very sad, carrying a small bag. She went towards the bus depot, but then came back and watched you sleep for a long time before leaving for good." Caleb's heart tightened. Sarah had come back. She had hesitated. That meant maybe she regretted it. Maybe she was nearby, waiting for the right time to return. This hope kept him glued to the square for 2 more weeks, refusing help from people who tried to take him to shelters or call the authorities. But as the days passed without any sign of Sarah, something inside the boy began to change. The initial hope gave way to a different determination. If his mother wouldn't come back to him, then he would go look for her. After all, he knew her favorite places in town, knew where she usually got odd jobs, knew the people she talked to. That's how his journey began through the streets of the coastal town where they had moved months before, when Sarah still had hopes of starting a new life, away from the problems of New York City. Caleb knocked on the door of the laundromat, where his mother sometimes managed to get some work. The owner, a plump, friendly woman named Brenda, received the boy affectionately, but shook her head sadly. "She was here a week ago, my dear. She seemed very distressed, asking if I knew any place where you could be well cared for. She said she was going to do something very difficult, but it was for your own good." Brenda's words confirmed what Caleb already suspected. His mother had planned the abandonment. It wasn't something impulsive, but a thought-out decision, which in a way hurt more, but also gave him hope that Sarah hadn't gone far. A mother who worries about finding a safe place for her son before abandoning him is not a mother who gives up completely. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out, now continuing. During the following weeks, Caleb mapped every corner of the small town where they might be hiding. He visited the house of the only friend Sarah had made there, a woman named Valerie who worked at the bakery downtown. Valerie received the boy with teary eyes, holding his small hands in her own, calloused from so much kneading of dough. "Your son, your mother did look for me, but it was almost a month ago. She said she was going through very difficult times, that she could no longer support herself, much less support you. She cried a lot here in my kitchen, asking if I knew any good family that could raise a child." Valerie's account revealed that Sarah had been planning the abandonment for weeks, perhaps months. This explained why she had been acting so strange lately, more silent, more sad, hugging Caleb tighter on cold nights. She was saying goodbye little by little, storing in her memory every hug, every smile, every word from her son. "But she never told me where she would stay," Valerie continued, serving a glass of warm milk to the hungry boy. "Only that it wouldn't be far from you. She said she needed to be sure you were okay before moving on with her life." The revelation brought a mix of relief and anguish to Caleb. Sarah had not left town. She was nearby, watching, making sure he was okay. That meant she still cared, that the abandonment wasn't due to a lack of love. But for some reason, he didn't yet fully understand. With this new information, the boy reformulated his search strategy. If his mother was hiding in the town, but still watching him, she would probably choose places away from the center, locations from where she could see him without being seen. The hills surrounding the town, the areas near the woods that separated the urban region from the rural zone. That's how Caleb began to venture beyond the limits he knew. With his backpack on his shoulders and a determination that would impress any adult, he began to explore the trails leading to the higher parts of the town. He slept in abandoned buildings, ate fruit he found along the way, drank water from springs and streams. Life on the streets had hardened the boy in ways a child his age should never have experienced. He learned to identify people who could help him and those from whom he should stay away. He developed survival instincts, becoming cautious but not completely losing trust in the good people he met along the way. During one of these explorations, 3 weeks after beginning his solitary search, Caleb reached an area of the woods he had never visited before. The trees were taller there, forming a closed canopy that filtered the sunlight into golden rays. The ground was covered with dry leaves that crunched with each step, and the air had a fresh smell of damp earth and vegetation. It was then that he spotted something that caught his attention, an opening in the rock, partially hidden by bushes and vines. It wasn't an ordinary cave, but rather a natural formation that created a kind of circular tunnel between the stones. The light passing through from the other side created an almost magical effect, as if there were a source of golden light at the end of the tunnel. Caleb hesitated for a moment. His experience on the streets had taught him to be cautious of unknown places. But something about that opening called to him, perhaps the promise of safe shelter after so many nights sleeping outdoors. Perhaps a child's intuition that he might find something important there. He adjusted his backpack better on his shoulders and began to approach the rocky entrance. The bushes made small scratches on his thin arms, but he persisted, driven by a curiosity he couldn't explain. When he finally managed to squeeze through the entrance, he discovered that his suspicions were correct. The cave was larger than it appeared from the outside. The stone walls formed a natural chamber, wide enough for an adult to stand comfortably. But what caught Caleb's attention most wasn't the size of the place, but the clear signs that someone had been there recently. On the ground, remains of a campfire with still warm ashes, piles of dry leaves arranged as if they were makeshift beds, empty cans organized neatly on a natural rock ledge that served as a shelf, and hanging from dry branches wedged between the stones, some cloths that seemed to have been washed and were drying. Caleb's heart raced. Someone lived there. Someone who, by the organized way they kept the place, wasn't just a common homeless person, but someone who had turned that cave into a true makeshift home. Could it be that Sarah had found that refuge? Was that where she was hiding? The boy explored every corner of the cave carefully, searching for any clue that could confirm his suspicions. That's when he found something that made his heart leap, a small metal box shallowly buried at the back of the cave, covered only with a few loose stones. Inside the box, dozens of handwritten letters, all folded carefully and organized by date. The letters weren't addressed to Sarah, but to different children's names: Jack, Mary, Peter, Anne, Charles. All signed the same way. With love, the aunt who takes care of you. Caleb opened one of the most recent letters with trembling hands. The handwriting was neat, from someone who had studied, very different from his mother's simple penmanship. The letter was one of thanks, talking about a child who had been helped to reunite with their family after weeks lost in the city. Dear Aunt, I will never forget the days I spent in the cave with you. You gave me food when I was hungry, took care of my wounds, and most of all gave me hope when I thought I would never see my family again. Today I am home, safe and sound, thanks to your kindness. One day, I want to do the same for other lost children like I was. The revelation was like a punch to Caleb's stomach. That cave wasn't just any shelter. It was a refuge maintained by someone who dedicated their life to caring for abandoned or lost children. And if Sarah wasn't there, perhaps this mysterious person could help him find her. The boy continued reading other letters, each telling a similar story. Children who had found safety and care in that cave before being reunited with their families or directed to safe homes. The aunt mentioned in the letters seemed to be a kind of silent guardian angel who operated without fanfare, without involving authorities, driven only by compassion. One of the letters, dated 3 months prior, especially caught Caleb's attention. It was from a girl named Sophia, who talked about an adult woman who had appeared at the cave looking for her missing son. The physical description mentioned in the letter matched Sarah's characteristics perfectly: wavy brown hair, green eyes, a small scar on the chin. The aunt said she knew the woman I described, that she had passed by here a few times in recent weeks. She was very thin and sad, always asking about boys her son's age who might be lost in the area. The aunt promised that if she found her son, she would take very good care of him until she could reunite the two of you again. Caleb's hands trembled as he finished reading that letter. Sarah had been there. She had spoken with the mysterious aunt about him. This confirmed his suspicions that his mother hadn't left, but was searching for him just as he was searching for her. Somehow, his path had crossed with that of this kind woman who cared for lost children. The sound of footsteps outside the cave made Caleb quickly put the letters back in the box and hide behind a rock ledge. His heart was beating so loudly he was sure anyone could hear it. The footsteps approached slowly, and a woman's voice hummed a quiet tune he didn't recognize. A woman appeared at the cave entrance, carrying a cloth bag and a jug of water. Caleb estimated she was between 40 and 50 years old, with graying hair tied in a simple bun, wearing clothes that were clean but patched in places. Her face had expression lines that spoke of someone who smiled often, despite life's hardships. The woman stopped at the entrance, sensing something was different. Her experienced eyes scanned the cave and quickly identified signs of Caleb's presence: footprints in the dirt, the box of letters slightly out of place, dry leaves scattered where they had been tidy. "I know you're there, child," she said softly, showing no fear or irritation. "I won't hurt you. This cave is a safe place for those in need." Caleb remained hidden, his survival instinct louder than his curiosity. He had learned to distrust unfamiliar adults, even those who seemed kind. Often, on the streets, people who appeared gentle at first later revealed less noble intentions. The woman, sensing the child's hesitation, began calmly organizing her things as if she were alone. She took some bread, fruit, and a bottle of milk from the bag. She lit a small fire with the skill of someone who had done it hundreds of times. The smell of food made Caleb's stomach growl loud enough to be heard. "You must be hungry," the woman remarked, still not looking directly at where Caleb was hiding. "I'll leave some bread and a little milk here near the entrance. You can take it when you feel comfortable." She kept her promise, placing the food on an improvised plate made of large leaves and moving to the back of the cave. Caleb wrestled between the hunger he felt and the caution he had learned on the streets. His stomach, empty for almost a full day, ultimately won the mental battle. He slowly came out of his hiding spot, ready to run at the first sign of danger. The woman stayed where she was, tending to her things unhurriedly, allowing the boy to approach the food. Caleb took the bread and milk and quickly returned to his spot, but now a little closer. "What's your name?" the woman asked after a few minutes of silence, still not looking directly at him. Caleb chewed slowly, weighing whether he should answer. Something in that woman's voice, in the patience with which she handled his distrust, reminded him of his mother in better times. He decided to risk it. "Caleb," he murmured, his voice hoarse from so long without speaking to anyone. "That's a nice name, Caleb. My name is Martha, but the children who pass through here call me Aunt Marty. How long have you been alone?" The question touched an open wound in the boy's heart. He calculated mentally. 3 weeks since Sarah had abandoned him, plus 3 weeks searching for her. Nearly 2 months living alone on the streets and in the woods. "Quite a while," he answered vaguely, still reluctant to share details of his story. Martha nodded with understanding, as if she had heard similar answers many times before. She began to talk about herself naturally, without pressing Caleb for more information. She spoke about how she had found that cave years earlier, during a walk to deal with her own sadness after losing her job as a nurse. "In the beginning, I came here just to think, to be alone when life got too heavy," she explained, stoking the fire with a stick, "until one day I found a lost girl crying nearby. She had gotten separated from her family during a festival in the town square and was terrified. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out." Now continuing. Martha told how she helped the girl find her family and how in the following days, other children in similar situations began to appear in the area, as if the news that it was a safe place had spread mysteriously among those in need. Gradually, she turned that occasional visit into a routine, keeping the cave always ready to receive anyone who needed it. "I never planned this," she continued, offering more food to Caleb, who now felt a little more at ease to come closer. "It just happened. I'd been a nurse for almost 20 years, so caring for people always came naturally to me. When I lost my job at the county hospital, I thought I had lost my purpose. But perhaps my true purpose was always this." Martha's story resonated deeply with Caleb. Like him, she had gone through losses and hardships. Like him, she had found in adversity a strength she didn't even know she possessed. But unlike him, she had chosen to use that strength to help others. "Have you taken care of many children here?" asked Caleb, his curiosity finally overcoming his distrust. Martha's eyes lit up with a mixture of pride and melancholy. She spoke of dozens of children who had passed through over the years. Some stayed just one night, others a few weeks, each with their own story, their fears, their hopes. "Most managed to reunite with their family," she explained. "Other times, I help find safe homes, good people willing to care for them. I never involve the official authorities, because I know sometimes bureaucracy can separate those who should stay together or join those who should stay apart." Caleb thought of the letters he had read, each representing a life that had been touched by that woman's kindness. He gathered the courage to ask the question that had been troubling him most since he arrived at the cave. Did you ever meet a woman named Sarah? She's my mother. She left me alone a few weeks ago. One of the letters I read mentioned a woman who was looking for her son." Martha's face changed when she heard the name Sarah. A mixture of recognition, compassion, and something that seemed like worry crossed her features. She added wood to the fire before answering, as if she needed time to choose the right words. "Sarah," she repeated slowly. "Yes, I know her. She came here several times in the last few weeks. A young woman, brown hair, very thin, always crying." Caleb's heart raced. "Yes, that's her. Where is she? Do you know where she is now?" Martha's expression grew even more serious. She moved closer to Caleb, kneeling in front of him so they were at the same height. Her calloused hands gently touched the boy's shoulders. "Caleb, your mother is going through a very difficult time. She came here desperate, talking about how she had made a terrible decision because she could no longer care for you. She cried so much she could barely explain the situation." "But where is she?" insisted Caleb, tears beginning to form in his eyes. "Why did she abandon me if she was suffering so much? Why didn't she talk to me?" Martha took a deep breath before continuing. "Your mother is sick, Caleb. Not physically, but in here," she said, touching her own chest. "She told me she lost her job a few months ago, that you lost your house, that she could no longer give you the basic things a child needs. The guilt and desperation made her think you'd be better off without her." Tears now streamed freely down Caleb's dirty face. Everything made sense. The last months of hardship, Sarah's distant manner, the longer hugs, as if she were saying goodbye. She hadn't abandoned him for lack of love, but exactly the opposite. "Where is she now?" he asked between sobs. "I don't know," Martha answered honestly. "The last time I saw her was 2 weeks ago. She said she was going to find a place to stay while making sure you were being well cared for. She promised she'd come back when she got herself back on her feet." The revelation brought relief and anguish in equal measure to Caleb. His mother hadn't given up on him, but was lost to her own inner demons. She was nearby but out of reach, fighting a battle he couldn't fully understand at his age. Martha spent the whole night talking with Caleb, gradually drawing out his full story: the months of financial hardship, the eviction, The weeks at the town square, the goodbye note, his lonely journey through the streets looking for Sarah. With each detail, the woman's admiration for the boy grew. "You are very brave, Caleb," she said, when the boy finished telling everything. "Many children your age would have given up or accepted help from the first people they met. But you kept looking for your mother even when everything seemed impossible." "She's all I have," Caleb replied simply. "Even when things were tough, she always took care of me. Now it's my turn to take care of her." Martha was silent for a few moments, impressed by the boy's emotional maturity. In her decades as a nurse and her years caring for lost children, she had seen many difficult situations, but she had rarely witnessed such a deep and determined filial love. "I will help you find your mother," she finally promised. "I know many places in the city where people in difficult situations tend to stay. I have contacts in hospitals, shelters, churches. If Sarah is around here, we'll find her." In the following days, Martha and Caleb became an unlikely investigative duo. During the day, they visited different locations in the city, looking for clues about Sarah's whereabouts. Martha used her experience and her network of contacts, while Caleb used his determination and his intimate knowledge of his mother's habits. They visited the county hospital where Martha had worked. They spoke with cleaning staff, security guards, night shift nurses. A nursing assistant named Joan vaguely remembered a woman matching Sarah's description who had fainted in the hospital courtyard a few weeks prior. "She seemed very weak," Joan recalled. "When she woke up, she was very confused, talking about a boy she had lost. The social worker tried to help, but she left the hospital before we could do anything." The clue led Martha and Caleb to the hospital's social services department, where a staff member named Claudia had more detailed records of the incident. Sarah had been treated for dehydration and malnutrition, but had refused to provide full personal information or accept official help. She just kept repeating that she had made the biggest mistake of her life and that she needed to find a way to fix it, Claudia remembered. When we offered psychological and social support, she said she didn't deserve help, that she was a terrible mother who had abandoned her own son. The account confirmed Martha's suspicions about Sarah's mental state. Guilt and depression were preventing her from accepting help, creating a vicious cycle where she pushed away precisely the people who could help her reunite with Caleb. "Do you know where she went when she left here?" asked Martha. One of the cleaning staff, Mrs. Miller, talked with her for a while before she left. "Maybe she has more information." Mrs. Miller was a woman in her 60s, with completely white hair and hands calloused from decades of hard work. When she learned they were looking for Sarah to reunite mother and son, her eyes filled with tears. "Oh my God, what a sad situation," she said, making the sign of the cross. "The young woman was so desperate it broke my heart. She stayed here with me for almost an hour, crying and talking about the son she had abandoned. Mrs. Miller told them she had offered her own house for Sarah to stay a few days while she got back on her feet, but she had refused, saying she didn't deserve anyone's kindness. Before leaving, Sarah had asked about places in town where people like her usually stayed. I told her about the municipal shelter, about the church's halfway house, about some spots in town where homeless folks gather. But she seemed to be looking for something more isolated. She asked about remote places, maybe in the countryside." This information completely changed the focus of the search. If Sarah was looking for isolation, places far from the urban area, it was possible she was hiding in some abandoned building in the rural areas surrounding the town. Martha knew some of these places from her walks and exploration of the region. "There are some abandoned farms on the road that leads to the mountains," Martha explained to Caleb as they planned the next steps of the search. "Houses that were left behind when families moved to the city. Your mother might have found shelter in one of those places." For a week, they systematically visited every abandoned building Martha knew, ruined farmhouses, abandoned barns, even a small decommissioned chapel on top of a hill. In each place, they found signs that people had been there recently, but no specific trace of Sarah. It was during one of these searches that Martha noticed important changes in Caleb. The boy was gaining weight from regular meals. His wounds were healing. His clothes were cleaner. But more important than the physical changes were the transformations in his personality. The initial distrust had given way to genuine trust in Martha. Caleb talked more, smiled occasionally, showed curiosity about the stories of the other children who had passed through the cave. He was, little by little, becoming a normal child again, despite the extraordinary situation they were in. "You know you can stay with me while we look for your mother, right?" Martha said one night, as they organized the cave to sleep. "Even if it takes a few more weeks, months, you have a safe place here." Caleb nodded, but Martha realized he still hadn't fully processed the possibility that Sarah might never be found. The boy's determination to reunite the family was admirable, but also worrying, because it protected him from facing more difficult scenarios. On the 10th day of intensive searching, they received a clue that changed everything. Valerie, Sarah's friend from the bakery, sought out Martha at the cave, bringing information that had reached her through the informal communication network that exists among people in vulnerable situations. "A woman who looks like Sarah was seen at the municipal shelter last week," Valerie said, breathless from climbing the trail to the cave. "She didn't want to stay there, but she talked to some people. She left a message saying that if anyone found a boy named Caleb, they should tell him she was okay and that she loved him very much." Caleb's heart leaped in his chest. Sarah was alive, she was nearby, and she was still thinking of him. The message proved she hadn't given up completely, that there was still hope of reuniting the family. "Anything else?" asked Martha. "Yes," continued Valerie. "She specifically asked about an Aunt Marty, who took care of lost children. She said if her son was found by this person, she could rest easy, knowing he would be safe." The revelation was like a punch to Martha's stomach. Sarah not only knew about her work, but had left Caleb in the town square, hoping he would eventually find his way to the cave. The abandonment hadn't been random, but calculated, based on the hope that Martha would care for the boy. "She knew," murmured Martha, more to herself than to the others. "Sarah knew you would eventually come to me. That's why she didn't go far. That's why she left clues about her whereabouts. She wanted to make sure you were safe before—" "Before what?" asked Caleb, noticing Martha had stopped mid-sentence. Martha hesitated, not wanting to frighten the boy, but knowing he deserved the truth. "Caleb, your mother is very emotionally ill. The kind of illness that can make a person make definitive decisions when they feel hopeless." The boy didn't fully understand the implications of Martha's words, but he understood it was urgent to find Sarah as quickly as possible. From that moment on, the search gained a new urgency, a race against time that neither of them fully verbalized. Valerie shared more information she had gathered through her network of contacts. Sarah had also been seen at the bus depot, not buying tickets but watching the people arriving and departing. She had asked the staff about bus schedules leaving town, but hadn't purchased any ticket. "It's as if she were saying goodbye to places," analyzed Martha. "Visiting important locations one last time before—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Caleb understood the gravity of the situation. His mother was making a kind of farewell tour, and they needed to find her before it was too late. From that moment on, the search became a race against time. Martha mobilized her entire network of contacts, hospital staff, people who worked in shelters, merchants who knew the movements of the homeless population. Caleb, in turn, used his intimate knowledge of Sarah's habits to suggest places the adults wouldn't think to look. That's how they ended up at the municipal cemetery, a place Caleb remembered Sarah mentioning when she spoke about difficult moments from her own childhood. It was a quiet place, away from the town's bustle, where a person could be alone with their thoughts undisturbed. Martha and Caleb walked silently among the graves, looking for any sign of Sarah's presence. It was Caleb who saw her first, a hunched figure sitting at the foot of a tree at the back of the cemetery, so still that for a moment he feared he was too late. "Mom?" he called softly, his voice trembling with emotion and fear. Sarah lifted her head slowly, as if emerging from a deep dream. When her eyes met Caleb's, she seemed not to believe what she was seeing. It had been almost 2 months since she'd left the note in the town square, and her son was there, alive, apparently well cared for. "Caleb?" she murmured, her voice hoarse from crying. Where did you—" The boy ran toward his mother, throwing himself into her arms with a force that almost knocked her over. Sarah hugged him as if he were the most precious thing in the world, crying uncontrollably while repeating pleas for forgiveness. "Forgive me, my son. Forgive me," she repeated between sobs. "I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't know how to care for you anymore. I thought you'd be better off without me." Caleb pulled back slightly to look at his mother's face. Sarah was much thinner than he remembered, with deep, dark circles and an expression of weariness that went beyond the physical. But she was alive. She was there. And that was all that mattered to him at that moment. "Why did you leave me, Mom? Why didn't you talk to me first?" Sarah tried to explain through tears about the months of growing difficulties, about how she felt like a failure as a mother for not being able to provide the basics for her son, about how guilt and despair had clouded her judgment. To her, abandoning Caleb had seemed an act of love, a way to free him from a life of deprivation. Martha, who had remained at a respectful distance during the reunion, approached slowly. When Sarah saw her, she immediately recognized the woman she had searched for several times in recent weeks. "Your Aunt Marty," said Sarah, trying to compose herself, "the woman who cares for lost children." "And you are the Sarah who has been looking for this brave boy," replied Martha with a gentle smile. "He has talked about you every day since we met." Sarah looked alternately at Martha and Caleb, trying to process how they knew each other, how her son had found exactly the person she had hoped would find him. Martha briefly told how Caleb had arrived at the cave and about the weeks they spent together searching for her. "He never gave up on you," explained Martha. "Even when it was easier to accept help and start a new life, he insisted on looking for you. His love for you never wavered, not for a moment." Martha's words made Sarah cry even more, but now they were tears of relief mixed with remorse. She had spent almost 2 months tortured by guilt, hiding, punishing herself for a decision she thought was irreversible. Discovering that Caleb not only forgave her, but had risked everything to find her, was more than she felt she deserved. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now, continuing. Martha suggested they leave the cemetery and go to a more appropriate place to talk. Sarah hesitated, unsure if she deserved the kindness being offered, but Caleb held her hand firmly. "Come on, Mum. Aunt Marty has a cave in the woods where we can stay. It's a safe place." Sarah allowed herself to be guided to the cave, impressed by the confidence and maturity her son had developed during their time apart. The boy she had left in the town square was vulnerable and scared. The boy by her side now was still a child, but there was something different in his eyes, an inner strength that wasn't there before. In the cave, Martha prepared a simple meal while mother and son talked. Sarah told of the last 2 months, how she had spent the first weeks watching Caleb from afar in the town square, how she had fallen into despair when he disappeared, how she had searched for him everywhere she could think of. "I would hide behind the trees, watching you sleep on the bench," confessed Sarah. "I wanted so badly to come back, to take you in my arms and say everything would be okay. But I didn't know how we would survive. We had no home left. I couldn't get a job. We didn't even have money for food." Caleb listened patiently, trying to understand his mother's perspective. In his childlike innocence, financial problems seemed less important than being together, but he was beginning to understand that for an adult, the responsibility of caring for a child without resources was a crushing weight. "But we can start over, right, Mum?" he asked with hope. "Aunt Marty can help us find a place to live. You can look for work again." Martha, who was listening to the conversation while cooking, approached with food for Sarah. The woman was clearly malnourished, trembling slightly, showing physical signs of the prolonged emotional stress she had faced. "Sarah," said Martha gently, "you need to take care of yourself before you can properly care for Caleb. When was the last time you ate a full meal? When was the last time you slept a full night?" Sarah admitted she had lost track of time in recent months. Since she lost her job, her life had become a sequence of unstructured, purposeless days, just surviving from one moment to the next. Abandoning Caleb had been the lowest point of a downward spiral that had begun long before. Martha recognized the signs of severe depression she had seen in patients during her years as a nurse. Sarah needed professional help, but also hope, a renewed purpose, a reason to fight for life again. And that reason was sitting beside her, holding her hand with the determination of a child who had grown up too fast. "I'm going to help you both," promised Martha. "But we need to do this the right way. Sarah, you need to accept treatment for depression. Caleb, you need to accept that your mother will need time to heal completely." In the following days, Martha began mobilizing her network of contacts to help Sarah and Caleb in practical ways. She knew a psychologist who offered volunteer sessions for people in vulnerable situations. She also knew a priest who maintained a small fund to help families in crisis, and a retired businesswoman who sometimes offered jobs to people who were restarting their lives. The first step was to get psychological care for Sarah. The psychologist, Dr. Harrison, was a woman in her 40s who had chosen to dedicate part of her time to social cases after having gone through severe depression herself years before. Sarah initially resisted the idea of therapy, thinking she didn't deserve help, or that she was strong enough to solve her problems alone. It was Caleb who convinced her, explaining with the simple wisdom of a child that accepting help was not a sign of weakness but of love for him. "If you get better, Mom, I get better too," said Caleb. "We're together now, so your problems are our problems, and we're going to solve them together." The therapy sessions revealed layers of problems that went far beyond the recent financial crisis. Sarah had grown up in a troubled home, had become a mother very young, had been through abusive relationships. The loss of her job and home had been just the final triggers of a crisis that had been building for years. Parallel to the psychological treatment, Martha worked to establish a minimal material foundation so mother and son could rebuild their lives. She secured a simple but clean room in a family-run boarding house in town, paid for 2 months' rent in advance, and helped Sarah look for a job. The job search was initially frustrating. Sarah had lost confidence in her abilities, was afraid she couldn't hold down a job, feared leaving Caleb alone after all they had been through. But Martha was patient, accompanying her to interviews, helping her rebuild her professional self-esteem. It was during one of these searches that they met Mr. Bennett, a 60-year-old man who ran a small diner near the elementary school. He had recently lost his wife and was struggling to keep the business going alone. When Martha told the story of Sarah and Caleb, Mr. Bennett made an unusual offer. "You can work here in the mornings," he offered to Sarah. "The boy can stay here after school, doing his homework while you finish your shift. That way you're together. He has a safe place to be, and I get help with the diner." The offer was perfect for their situation. Sarah could work without worrying about what Caleb was doing after school, and Caleb could ease the longing for his mother that he still felt even with her nearby. Moreover, Mr. Bennett had lost his own grandchildren when the family moved to another city and missed the company of children. Sarah accepted the job with tears in her eyes. It was the first real step toward independence, the first time in months she felt she could truly provide for her son again. The salary was modest, but enough to pay the rent for the room and basic necessities. Caleb, in turn, was enrolled in the elementary school. Initially, he had trouble adapting. He had lost almost a semester of school during their time on the streets, and his classmates didn't understand where he had come from or why he was starting classes in the middle of the year. But the same determination that had led him to search for Sarah on the streets now helped him with his studies. He dedicated himself intensely to catching up on lost time, studying in the afternoons at Mr. Bennett's diner while Sarah worked. The older man, who had been an elementary school teacher before opening the diner, began helping Caleb with his lessons. "This boy has an impressive inner strength," Mr. Bennett commented to Martha during one of her visits. "I've seen many children in my teaching days, but I've rarely seen someone so determined to overcome difficulties." Martha agreed. Caleb had undergone a remarkable transformation since reuniting with his mother. The suspicious and frightened boy she had found in the cave was becoming a confident, sociable child who helped other struggling classmates and volunteered for small tasks at the diner without being asked. Sarah was also gradually changing. The psychological treatment was helping her process past traumas and develop strategies to deal with anxiety and depression. The work at the diner was restoring her sense of purpose and dignity. Most importantly, seeing Caleb happy and adjusted was healing the wounds of guilt that had consumed her for months. 3 months after the reunion at the cemetery, the family's life had found a new stability. Sarah had been promoted to manager of the diner, taking on more responsibilities and earning a better salary. Caleb had not only caught up on lost school time, but was among the top students in his class. Martha continued to be a constant presence in their lives, but no longer as an urgent necessity, rather as a dear friend, a sort of adoptive grandmother who visited them regularly and was always available when they needed advice or emotional support. The cave in the woods continued to be maintained by Martha as a refuge for other children in vulnerable situations, but now with the help of Sarah and Caleb. On weekends, they would hike up the trail to help with cleaning, organizing, and especially to talk with new children who arrived at the site. Sarah discovered that her personal experience with depression and abandonment made her especially capable of understanding and supporting mothers in similar situations. She began accompanying Martha on difficult cases, offering a unique perspective from someone who had been at rock bottom and managed to climb out. Caleb, in turn, became a sort of ambassador to the younger children arriving at the cave. His story of determination and family reunion offered hope to those who had lost faith in the possibility of finding their families again. During one of these visits to the cave, 6 months after the reunion, Sarah found a girl of about 7 who had been separated from her family during a town festival. The situation reminded her so much of her own desperation that Sarah immediately offered to lead the search for the child's parents. "I know exactly what her parents are feeling," she explained to Martha. "The desperation, the guilt, the fear of what might have happened. We can't let them suffer longer than necessary." The search for the girl's parents lasted only 2 days, but it further strengthened the bond between Sarah, Martha, and the support work they did together. Sarah discovered she had a natural talent for calming both lost children and desperate parents, using her own experience to offer real, tangible hope. It was during this period that a situation arrived at the cave that would test all the learning and growth Sarah had achieved. A 15-year-old teenager, pregnant and running away from home due to family rejection, arrived at the refuge in a state of panic and utter despair. The girl, named Julie, was 6 months pregnant and had left home after her parents kicked her out upon discovering her condition. She had spent a week on the streets, sleeping at bus stops and feeding on scraps found in the trash. When she arrived at the cave, she was dehydrated, starving, and emotionally shattered. Martha had dealt with difficult situations before, but never with a pregnancy at risk. Sarah, seeing the girl's state, immediately took control of the situation with an assertiveness that surprised even herself. "First, let's take care of her physically," Sarah said with determination. "Then we worry about everything else. A life is at risk here." Sarah used contacts she had made through Martha to get discreet medical care for Julie. She convinced a retired gynecologist who did volunteer work to examine the teenager right at the cave, avoiding the exposure of taking her to a hospital where they might ask difficult questions. The examination revealed that despite the week of hardship, both Julie and the baby were in relatively stable condition, but the girl needed intensive nutritional care and regular medical monitoring until delivery. Sarah did not hesitate to offer for Julie to stay with them in the boarding house room. "We can't let her go back to the street," Sarah argued with Martha and Caleb. "Remember how I felt when I thought I had no options, when I thought the whole world had rejected me. This girl is going through the same thing, but carrying a life inside her." The decision to shelter Julie was not easy. The room at the boarding house was small, money was tight, and the presence of a pregnant teenager would completely change the family dynamic that Sarah and Caleb had built with so much effort. But the boy, who had matured greatly in recent months, fully supported his mother's decision. "If Aunt Marty hadn't helped me, I'd still be lost," Caleb said with a wisdom impressive for his age. "Now it's our turn to help someone." Julie initially distrusted Sarah's generosity, thinking there was some hidden motive, or that she would eventually be thrown out when she became too much of a burden. She had learned to distrust adults after the brutal rejection from her own family. Sarah, remembering her own initial distrust of Martha's help, was patient. She told her own story to Julie, explaining how she had abandoned Caleb in a moment of desperation, how she had been reunited with him through the kindness of strangers, how she had rebuilt her life from scratch, "I'm not doing this because you owe me anything," explained Sarah, as she arranged a comfortable space for Julie in the bedroom. "I'm doing it because someone did it for me when I needed it most." That's how the world works. Kindness begets kindness. In the following weeks, Julie's presence brought significant changes for everyone. Caleb, who had been an only child his whole life, found himself enjoying having someone younger, in years but more mature in experience, to talk to. Julie in turn found in the boy a non-judgmental listener for her worries about motherhood. Sarah found herself revisiting her own fears and insecurities about motherhood while helping Julie prepare for the baby's birth. Conversations about newborn care, about how to balance work and motherhood, about how to handle social pressure, brought back memories of when she herself had been a young and frightened mother. The experience forced Sarah to confront parts of her past that she hadn't fully processed in therapy. Memories of her own desperation when Caleb was born, of how she felt alone and judged, of how the lack of family support had contributed to her later struggles. Dr. Harrison, the psychologist who was seeing Sarah, was fascinated by how the situation of helping Julie was accelerating her patient's therapeutic process. "Sometimes, when we help others, we find healing for our own wounds," she observed during one of the sessions. Martha continued to be a key piece in supporting the extended family that had formed. She helped get baby clothes and equipment, mobilized her contacts in the medical field to ensure proper prenatal care for Julie, and most importantly offered the wisdom of someone who had seen many difficult situations turn into stories of overcoming. "You're creating something beautiful here," Martha said to Sarah during one of her visits. "A family that isn't based just on blood, but on the choice to care for each other. That's what really matters." Julie's pregnancy progressed without major complications, but brought to light practical issues that needed to be resolved. The teenager didn't have her documents in order, hadn't finished her studies, and most importantly was terrified by the idea of not being able to properly care for the baby. Sarah, remembering her own fears when she was a young mother, began to teach Julie everything she knew about baby care. More than that, she honestly shared her own insecurities, her mistakes, her discoveries about motherhood. "Being a mother isn't about being perfect," explained Sarah during one of her nightly conversations with Julie. "It's about loving unconditionally, always trying your best, and accepting help when you need it. That's what I took too long to learn, and it was almost too late." Caleb watched these conversations with growing curiosity and maturity. He was learning about family not only through his own experience with Sarah, but also by seeing how people who aren't blood relatives can become family through mutual care. The boy began to prepare to be a sort of big brother to Julie's baby. He researched books about newborns at the school library, asked Mr. Bennett questions about what it was like having small children at home, offered to help with practical preparations. "It'll be cool to have a baby at home," Caleb commented to Sarah one night. "It'll be like having a really big family. And I already know how to take care of people. I learned by taking care of you when I found you." The boy's observation touched Sarah deeply. Caleb had learned about care and responsibility through necessity during the months he searched for her on the streets. Now he was applying those lessons in a completely different situation, showing a generosity and maturity far beyond his years. 3 weeks before the due date, Julie began having premature contractions. Sarah, who had become her main source of emotional support, didn't hesitate to accompany her to the hospital, even knowing it would mean missing a day of work and facing complicated bureaucratic situations. At the hospital, Sarah became Julie's advocate with the healthcare professionals, ensuring the teenager received dignified and respectful treatment despite her age and social situation. Her own experience with the healthcare system during difficult times had taught her how to navigate these situations with assertiveness. The contractions were controlled with medication, but the doctors recommended absolute rest until delivery. This meant Julie could no longer help with the small household tasks she had taken on as a way to contribute to the family. Sarah reassured her, explaining that taking care of her was a priority, not a burden. "When I was pregnant with Caleb, I had no one to take care of me when I needed it," Sarah told her. "I had to work until the last day. I had to manage on my own when I should have been resting. I won't let that happen to you." The period of forced rest ended up creating opportunities for deeper conversations between Julie and Sarah. The teenager began sharing details about her family, about the circumstances that led to the pregnancy, about her fears for the future. Julie came from a conservative religious family that had reacted to the news of her pregnancy with total rejection. Her mother, whom she described as loving until she discovered the pregnancy, had said she had brought shame to the family and that she could no longer live under the same roof. "I was always a good daughter," Julie cried during one of these conversations. "I never caused trouble. I always got good grades in school. I made a mistake. I got pregnant by accident, but that shouldn't cancel out all the good I've always been." Sarah recognized echoes of her own experience with social and family judgment in Julie's story. Although her pregnancy with Caleb hadn't resulted in being kicked out of the house, she had faced constant criticism and a lack of support that had contributed to her later difficulties as a single mother. "People forget that behind every mistake there's a whole person," Sarah replied. "You're not just a pregnant teenager. You're intelligent, caring, strong, and you're going to be a wonderful mother. It's your family that's making the mistake by not being able to see that." These conversations strengthened the bond between them and also helped Sarah process her own experiences with social judgment. She began to realize how she had internalized much of the criticism she'd received over the years, how it had contributed to her low self-esteem and eventually to her depression. Caleb, who often overheard these conversations, was learning valuable lessons about empathy, forgiveness, and the complexity of human relationships. His questions to Sarah after these conversations showed a growing understanding of how people's difficulties affect their decisions. "Mom, when you left me at the town square, was it because other people made you feel bad about being my mother?" he asked one night, with the direct curiosity of children. The question took Sarah by surprise with its accuracy. Caleb had connected his own experiences with Julie's stories, understanding that personal problems rarely happen in a vacuum, but are influenced by broader social and family pressures. "Partly, yes," Sarah answered honestly. "People made me feel like I wasn't good enough to be your mother, that you deserved someone better. I started to believe it, and it made me make a terrible decision. But now you know they were wrong, right?" "Yes, my son. Now I know they were wrong, and more importantly, I know that even when people say things that hurt us, we can't let that make us hurt other people we love." These conversations became an important part of Sarah's emotional healing. Talking about her experiences with Caleb, explaining her decisions and motivations, was helping her forgive herself for past mistakes. Julie's delivery happened on a December morning, 3 days before the due date. Sarah was working at the diner when Caleb came running from school, saying Julie was having strong pains. Martha, who had offered to be on call, arrived quickly to help. At the hospital, Sarah stayed by Julie's side throughout the entire labor, holding her hand, offering words of encouragement, being the maternal figure the teenager needed in that crucial moment. Martha took care of Caleb in the waiting room, explaining the birthing process and reassuring him about the cries coming from the delivery room. When the baby was finally born, a healthy girl Julie decided to name Hope, the emotion in the hospital room was palpable. Sarah cried with joy, remembering her own lonely delivery years before, grateful she could offer Julie the support she herself had not received. Caleb, when he finally got to meet the baby, was fascinated. He held her with extreme care, murmured loving words, promised to be the best big brother he could be. The scene touched all the women present deeply. "She's so tiny," whispered Caleb. "How is she going to learn to do everything by herself?" "She won't be alone," Sarah replied. "She'll have Julie, she'll have us, she'll have Aunt Marty, she'll have a whole family to teach and take care of her." In the days following the birth, the household dynamic changed completely. A newborn brought joy, but also responsibilities and challenges that tested the family structure they had built. Sleepless nights, constant crying, the natural anxiety of a first-time mother. Sarah found herself reliving her own first days as a mother, but this time with the perspective and wisdom of her experience. She could offer Julie the practical and emotional support she herself had desperately wished for when Caleb was born. "It's normal to feel lost at first," Sarah reassured when Julie cried in frustration, because she couldn't get Hope to stop crying. You're not born knowing how to be a mother. We learn by doing, by making mistakes, by trying again. Caleb adapted to the baby's presence better than anyone expected. He took on small responsibilities like helping with diapers, rocking the baby when Julie needed to rest, even waking up in the early hours to alert them when Hope cried. "This boy has a heart of gold," Julie commented to Sarah. "I don't know how you managed to raise someone so generous and responsible." "It wasn't just me," Sarah answered honestly. "The hardships he went through, the good people he met along the way, all of that helped shape who he is today. Sometimes the most difficult experiences create the strongest and most compassionate people." Martha watched these transformations with admiration and pride. The family that had formed around the cave in the woods was proving that the strongest bonds aren't necessarily those of blood, but those of choice, mutual care, and unconditional love. 3 months after Hope's birth, life had found a new rhythm. Sarah had negotiated a more flexible work schedule with Mr. Bennett so she could help with the baby. Julie was adjusting to motherhood and starting to make plans to resume her studies. Caleb was doing excellently in school and had become a sort of local celebrity as the boy who found his mother. Their story had spread organically through the small community. People who had known Sarah during the difficult months, who had seen Caleb searching for her on the streets, who had witnessed the transformation of both, began seeking out Martha, asking for help with other difficult family situations. "You've become an example," explained Martha during a Sunday lunch at Mr. Bennett's diner, which had become a regular meeting spot for the whole extended family. "People see that it's possible to start over, that it's possible to forgive, that it's possible to build a family in non-traditional ways." Martha's observation led Sarah to a deep reflection on the purpose of everything they had been through. Her months of desperation, abandoning Caleb, the desperate search that followed, the reunion, the rebuilding, all of it had served not only to heal their own wounds, but to create a story of hope that inspired others. "You know what I think?" said Sarah, looking around the table where Martha, Caleb, Julie with Hope in her arms, and Mr. Bennett were gathered. "I think everything we went through wasn't just about us. It was about learning to create family in a different way, so we could teach other people that it's also possible." Caleb, now 9 years old and visibly more mature than other children his age, agreed with a wise smile. "We went through bad things, but in the end it served to help other people, like Julie and Hope. And like all the other kids who will still come to Aunt Marty's cave," added Sarah, "we can help because we know what it's like to be lost and what it's like to be found." The conversation planted a seed of an idea in Sarah's mind. In the following weeks, she began thinking about formalizing in some way the work that Martha did, perhaps creating a more organized structure to help families in crisis. Not something bureaucratic or official, but a more structured support network. She talked about the idea with Dr. Harrison, who was enthusiastic about the possibility. "You have something very valuable to offer," said the psychologist. "Lived experience combined with genuine compassion that can make a difference in many people's lives." Martha also supported the idea, but with her usual practical wisdom. "We need to be careful not to lose the simplicity and flexibility that make our work effective," she cautioned. "Sometimes too much structure can push away exactly the people who need help the most." Together, they began developing a plan. They would use the network of contacts Martha had built over the years, Sarah's personal experience with overcoming family crises, and the inspiration from Caleb's story to create an informal support group that would meet monthly. The first meeting was held at Mr. Bennett's diner on a Sunday afternoon. 6 people attended: a single mother struggling with depression, a father who had lost his job and was having difficulty supporting his family, a grandmother who had taken custody of her grandchildren, and a pregnant teenager in a situation similar to what Julie had faced. Sarah, who was initially nervous about speaking publicly about her experiences, found that telling her story was easier than she had imagined. The people listened attentively, asked questions, shared their own difficulties. "What impresses me most about your story," said the single mother present, "is that you don't try to pretend everything became perfect. You talk about how hard it is, but also about how it's possible." Caleb was present at the meeting, not as an active participant, but helping Mr. Bennet serve coffee and snacks. His silent presence, his helpful attitude, his obvious happiness and emotional health were living proof that difficult stories can have happy endings. The meetings became monthly, then bi-weekly, as more people learned about them and wanted to participate. Each gathering brought new stories, new challenges, new opportunities for connection and mutual support. Julie began to actively participate in the meetings when Hope turned 6 months old. Her story of teenage pregnancy, rejected by her family, resonated especially with other young mothers facing similar situations. "You saved me," Julie said at one of the meetings, looking at Sarah and Martha. "Not just physically by giving me shelter and food, but you showed me I could be a good mother, even though I was young, even though I had made mistakes." The support network that formed around the meetings began to function beyond the official gatherings. People exchanged phone numbers, visited each other during the week, offered practical help when someone was going through specific difficulties. Mr. Bennet began to offer temporary work for people who were unemployed. Martha expanded her network of medical and social contacts to meet growing demands. Sarah discovered she had a talent for mediating family conflicts and began to be sought out specifically for those situations. 1 year after the first meeting, the group had grown to more than 20 regular participants, with many others who attended occasionally. Mr. Bennet's diner had become too small, so they began to meet in the municipal schoolyard, which had provided the space free of charge. "Look at what you've created," Dr. Harrison said to Sarah during one of her therapy sessions, which were now monthly instead of weekly. "You've transformed your personal pain into a tool to help dozens of other families." Sarah smiled, remembering the desperate, depressed woman who had abandoned Caleb in the town square 2 years before. "Sometimes I think I needed to go through all that to get here," she reflected. "Not that I would wish it on anyone, but it made sense in the end." Caleb, now 10 years old, had become a sort of unofficial mascot for the support group. The children who came to the meetings with their parents always gravitated toward him, drawn by his natural ease with younger people and his welcoming attitude. The boy had developed his own project within the group, a toy library, where children from families with financial difficulties could borrow games and toys. He organized donations, catalogued the items, and personally took responsibility for explaining the system to new children. "My son has become a natural leader," Sarah commented to Martha during one of their conversations. "I think the difficulties he faced made him more sensitive to the needs of other children." Martha agreed, but also pointed to the qualities Caleb had shown from the very first day he arrived at the cave. "He was always special," she said. "The difficulties just revealed a strength that was already there." The cave in the woods continued to be maintained as a refuge for emergency situations, but now it was also a symbolic place for the entire group. Once a month, they organized hikes there, taking the children to see the place where it all began. During one of these walks, Hope, now a 1.5 years old and beginning to walk, took her first independent steps inside the cave. The moment was so symbolic, a new life taking its first steps in the place that represented rebirth and hope, that everyone present was moved. "This cave really has become a magical place," commented Julie, picking Hope up, "not because of supernatural powers, but because of everything that has happened here, all the lives that have been changed." Sarah nodded, looking around the cave where she had found her son after months of despair. The stone walls had witnessed dozens of stories of loss and reunion, despair and hope, families falling apart and rebuilding themselves in new and unexpected ways. "You know what amazes me the most?" Sarah said to the group gathered in the cave. "How people who have gone through such different hardships can understand and help each other. It's as if pain creates a common language." Caleb, sitting beside his mother, took her hand. "You always say you found me here, Mum, but I think we found each other, and then we found everyone else." The boy's observation deeply touched everyone present. It was true. The cave had become a meeting point not only physically, but emotionally and spiritually for dozens of people who had lost their original families in some way and found new forms of family. That night, after they returned to town, Sarah lay awake thinking about everything that had happened in the last 2 years. From a desperate woman who had abandoned her own son, she had become a community leader, a source of support for dozens of families, a person who offered tangible hope to those who thought there was no way out. Caleb, sleeping peacefully in the next room, they had gotten a 2-bedroom apartment 6 months earlier, was no longer the lost and frightened child she had found in the town square. He was a confident, compassionate boy, mature for his age, but still child enough to laugh loudly when playing with Hope. Julie, in the room she shared with her daughter, had become a strong young woman, determined to finish her studies and build an independent life. Hope, now walking and starting to say her first words, was a happy child who knew more uncles and aunts than most children her age. Martha continued to be the anchor of stability and wisdom for everyone, but she no longer carried alone the weight of caring for all the difficult cases that came to her. There was a network, a community, a support system that sustained itself. Mr. Bennett had become a sort of patriarch of the extended family, offering not just space in his diner, but practical advice, job opportunities, and the kind of father figure many in the group had never had. 2 years after abandoning Caleb in the town square, Sarah could no longer imagine her life without this entire extended family that had formed around her personal story of loss and reunion. What had begun as a personal tragedy had transformed into a story of hope that touched dozens of other lives. On a Saturday morning, exactly 2 years after the day Caleb had woken up alone in the square, Sarah decided to take her son there. Not to relive the pain, but to celebrate how far they had come since then. They sat on the same bench where it had all begun. Caleb, now significantly taller and stronger, still remembered perfectly that cold morning when he had found his mother's note. "Do you regret leaving me here?" asked Caleb, but without sadness or resentment. It was a question of genuine curiosity. Sarah thought carefully before answering. "I regret the pain this caused for both of us," she finally said, "but I can't completely regret it because everything that happened after. Our whole new family, everyone we were able to help. It might not have happened if I had made a different decision back then. So it was a bad thing that turned into a good thing. It was a desperate thing that God turned into something beautiful," replied Sarah. "Sometimes life is like that. Our worst moments end up leading to our best moments, but in ways we could never imagine." As they talked, several people who knew their story passed through the town square and greeted mother and son. Some stopped to talk, others just waved from a distance, all with genuine smiles, happy to see that family which had become a symbol of hope in the community. "Mom," said Caleb after a while in silence, "if you could go back in time and change something, what would you change?" Sarah looked at her son, thinking of all the difficulties they had faced, all the pain they had suffered, all the moments of despair and uncertainty. Then she looked around the square, remembering all the people their lives had touched, all the families they had helped, the whole community of love that had grown around their story. "You know something? I wouldn't change a thing," she finally said, "because changing anything could mean we wouldn't have gotten to where we are, and where we are is a very good place." Caleb smiled and hugged his mother. "I wouldn't change anything either, not even the bad moments, because the bad moments led us to the good ones." They sat on the bench for a few more minutes, not in sadness for the past, but in gratitude for the present and hope for the future. The town square, where they had separated in despair, had become the place where they celebrated their reunion and everything they had built together. When they finally got up to go back home, Sarah took Caleb's hand, and they walked together through the familiar streets of the town that had witnessed both their fall and their rise. On the streets, they greeted shopkeepers who knew their story, waved to children who attended the support group meetings, passed by Mr. Bennett's diner, which had become their second home. At home, Julie was preparing lunch, while Hope played on the floor with wooden blocks Caleb had made for her in a school workshop. Martha was sitting at the kitchen table, organizing papers for a new case that had come to her, a refugee family needing support to settle in the town. "How was the visit to the square?" asked Martha when Sarah and Caleb came in. "It was good," replied Sarah. "We talked about how we got here, about how it was worth going through all that to be where we are today." Martha smiled, understanding the feeling perfectly. "It's funny how places change meaning, isn't it? That square used to represent pain for you. Now it represents overcoming." "The cave, too," added Caleb. "At first I was afraid of it. Then it became my home. Now it's like a symbol of hope for everyone we help. Julie, who was seasoning the salad, stopped to join the conversation. You know what story I'm going to tell Hope when she grows up? I'll tell her how you found me at my worst moment and showed me it was possible to start over. I'll tell you how a family can form in ways different from what we imagine. And I'll tell you about how a mother and son got lost and found each other again, said Sarah, and how in the process they discovered that family isn't just who you're born with, but who you choose to stay with. Hope, who had stopped playing to pay attention to the adults' voices, began to babble and stretch her little arms toward Caleb. The boy immediately picked her up, making her laugh with tickles on her neck. Look at that, commented Martha. She already knows who the special people in her life are. This girl is going to grow up knowing what unconditional love is from the cradle. And she'll grow up knowing there's always hope, even when everything seems impossible, added Sarah. Because she's the daughter of a mother who went through the impossible and survived, and she's the adoptive little sister of a boy who never gave up searching for family. That Sunday's lunch was like many others in recent months, a table surrounded by people who had chosen to be family, sharing food, stories, laughter, and especially love. A family that had been born from pain, grown through persistence, and strengthened through mutual care. After lunch, as had become tradition, everyone helped with the cleanup. Caleb washed the dishes while humming. Julie dried and put everything in its place. Sarah cleaned the table and stove. Martha tidied the house and played with Hope. You know what I sometimes think, said Sarah as everyone worked together. I think that maybe this is the family we were always meant to have. Maybe we all needed to go through our individual hardships to find each other and discover how to care for one another. As if each of us had a piece of a puzzle, agreed Martha. And only when we put all the pieces together can we see the complete picture. Caleb, always practical despite his young age, made an observation that perfectly summed up everyone's feeling. What matters is that we're together now, and we know how to stay together even when things get tough. In the afternoon, they received a visit from Dr. Harrison, who had become not only Sarah's therapist, but a friend to the whole family. She brought news about a project she was developing, a support course for people who wanted to help families in crisis, based on the techniques Sarah and Martha had naturally developed. You've created something that works, explained the psychologist, an approach that combines emotional support, practical help, and especially hope based on lived experience. This can be replicated in other communities. The idea was ambitious but appealing, training other people to create similar support networks in their own towns, using Sarah and Martha's experience as a model, not just to help more families, but to create a solidarity movement that could spread organically. Sarah was intrigued but cautious. We don't want to lose the simplicity of what we do, she said. The strength of our work is in being personal, in being based on real relationships, not bureaucratic methods. That's exactly why you're the right people to develop this, replied Dr. Harrison. You know how to keep the humanity even when expanding the reach. Martha also showed interest, but with her usual practical precautions. We would need to be very careful to choose the right people, she said. People who truly understand that this isn't about following rules, but about loving people. Caleb listened to the conversation with growing interest. Would that mean other kids like me, in other places, could be helped by people like you? Yes, answered Dr. Harrison, and perhaps other mothers like yours could also find support before reaching the point of despair where your mother did. The possibility touched Sarah deeply. Imagining that her painful experience could be used to prevent other families from going through the same hardships gave an even greater purpose to everything they had lived through. Let's think about this, she finally said. But anything we do has to be true to what we've learned, that each person is unique, that each family has its own story, and that there are no quick fixes for deep problems. That night, after all the visitors had left and Hope was put to sleep, Sarah, Caleb, Julie, and Martha stayed in the living room talking about the project proposed by Dr. Harrison. It was an important conversation about the future, not only of their own lives, but potentially of the lives of many other families. "Mum," said Caleb, "remember when we met in the cave for the first time and you were afraid to trust people?" "I remember," replied Sarah. Why? Because now you're thinking about helping people we don't even know yet, in places we don't even know where they are. That shows how you've changed, how we've all changed. The boy's observation was profound and true. The Sarah who had abandoned Caleb in the town square was so consumed by her own pain that she could barely think beyond her immediate needs. The Sarah of today was considering dedicating part of her life to helping strangers facing difficulties similar to those she had overcome. "Caleb is right," said Julie. "We've all changed a lot. I was a scared girl who only thought about how I was going to survive. Now I'm raising my daughter and helping other young mothers who come to the group." Martha, the wisest of the group, offered her perspective. "I think change happens when we stop focusing only on our own pain and begin to use our experience to ease the pain of others. That's when we find true purpose." "So you think we should accept Dr. Harrison's project?" asked Sarah. "I think we should at least try," replied Caleb with conviction. "The worst that can happen is it doesn't work out, and then we go back to what we were already doing. But the best that can happen is we help many more people." The decision was made that night with the consensus of the whole family. They would explore the possibility of expanding their work, but always maintaining the principles they had learned through their own experience. Simplicity, personalization, genuine love, and hope based on real stories of overcoming. In the following months, Sarah and Martha began working with Dr. Harrison on developing the course. They documented their experiences, systematized their approaches, but always emphasizing that techniques only work when applied with genuine compassion. The first pilot course was offered in their own town for people from the region who wanted to replicate the work in neighboring communities. 15 participants attended: social workers, retired nurses, religious leaders, people who had overcome their own family difficulties. Sarah discovered she had a natural talent for teaching, especially when the subject was something she had lived through firsthand. Her authenticity, her willingness to share both successes and failures, her way of connecting theory with practical experience, all of this resonated deeply with the participants. "What impresses me most about your approach," commented one of the participants, "is that you don't pretend to have all the answers. You share what works, but also what doesn't work, and especially why." Caleb, now 11 years old, began occasionally participating in the courses, sharing his perspective as a child who had lived through abandonment and family reunification. His presence always deeply touched the participants. "Listening to Caleb speak makes us understand that behind every difficult case, there is a real child with real feelings," said one participant after hearing the boy tell his story. The success of the pilot course led to invitations to offer it in other towns. Sarah initially hesitated to travel and leave the routine they had built so carefully. But Martha encouraged her. "Our family is stable now," said Martha. "You can travel a few days a month knowing that Caleb, Julie, and Hope are well cared for, and what you will do on these trips can help hundreds of other families." The first course outside their town was offered in a rural community 4 hours away. Sarah traveled accompanied by Martha, leaving Caleb and Julie to look after each other and Hope, with Mr. Bennett discreetly supervising. The experience was transformative. Sarah discovered that stories of abandonment, reunification, and family rebuilding are universal. The specific details change, but the fundamental emotions, despair, hope, love, forgiveness, are the same anywhere. "Every town has its own stories like ours," Sarah observed to Martha during the return trip. "Families that got lost and need to find each other again, children who need adults who believe in them, people who need to discover they can start over." The expansion work continued gradually throughout the following year. Sarah and Martha offered courses in 10 different towns, always keeping groups small, always emphasizing personal relationships over impersonal methods. In each town, they left not only trained people, but support networks beginning to form. They received regular reports about families being reunited, children finding safe homes, people discovering they were not alone in their struggles. "We're not just teaching techniques," Sarah explained to Caleb during one of their nightly talks. "We're planting seeds of hope in places where people thought there was no way out. Caleb, who had accompanied Sarah on some of the trips during school vacations, was always impressed by how his personal story touched people in completely different places. "It's funny, Mum. We thought our problem was just ours, but it was actually a problem many people have." "Maybe that's why we went through all that," replied Sarah. "To discover we weren't alone, and to be able to show other people that they aren't alone either." 3 years after the reunion in the cave, Sarah received an invitation that deeply moved her. A university in New York City wanted to officially document their work, create a case study that could be used in psychology and social service courses. "You have developed something innovative," explained the professor who extended the invitation. "An approach that combines psychological support, social assistance, and most importantly, hope based on lived experience. This needs to be studied and preserved." Sarah was honored, but also apprehensive. "We don't want our story to become just an academic case," she said. "We want it to continue being about real people helping real people." The professor assured that the documentation would be done respectfully, focusing on the practical aspects that could help other professionals, but always maintaining the humanity and authenticity that made their work special. Caleb was excited by the idea. "Does it mean our story will be in books that students will read?" he asked. "And will they learn that there is always hope, even when everything seems impossible?" "Yes," replied Sarah, "and perhaps some of these students will become people who help other families like ours was helped." The case documentation took 6 months to complete. It involved detailed interviews with Sarah, Martha, Caleb, Julie, and even with Mr. Bennett and Dr. Harrison. It also included testimonies from people who had participated in the support groups and courses offered in other cities. The final result was more than just simple academic documentation. It was a powerful testimony about the human capacity for overcoming, about the transformative power of unconditional love, and about how personal stories of hardship can become a source of hope for others. When the study was published, Sarah received hundreds of letters from people who had read her story and found courage to face their own family difficulties. Many of the letters were from mothers who were considering abandoning their children, others from children who had been abandoned and were searching for their families. "Look at this," Sarah said to Caleb, showing a pile of letters that had arrived that week. "Our story is helping people we don't even know, in places we don't even know where they are. And the best part," Caleb replied, "is that now these people know they are not alone. They know that other people have been through similar things and managed to be okay." One of the letters that touched Sarah the most was from a woman from another state who had read the story and decided to search for the son she had abandoned 10 years earlier. She wrote to thank Sarah for her courage in sharing her experience and to tell that she had managed to reunite with her son through a local organization inspired by their work. "You didn't just save your own family," the woman wrote. "You are saving families you will never meet just by having the courage to tell the truth about your hardships and your overcoming." The letter made Sarah cry, but they were tears of gratitude and fulfillment. Everything they had been through, the pain, the despair, the separation, the desperate search, the reunion, the rebuilding, had been worth it not only for them, but for hundreds of other families who found hope in their story. Martha, now 55 years old, had become a nationally respected figure in work with families in crisis. She received invitations for lectures, consultations, and participation in public policy, but she never lost focus on the direct work with people who needed help. "Academia and public policy are important," Martha explained to Sarah, "but our real work is always with the people who come to us needing immediate care. That can never change." Julie, now 18 years old, had finished high school with excellent grades and gotten a scholarship to study psychology. Hope, 3 years old, was a happy and articulate child who called Sarah Grandma and Caleb Bro, showing that family really is about chosen relationships, not just biological bonds. "I want to study psychology so I can help families like you helped me," Julie explained during one of her conversations with Sarah. "But I want to do it like you do, with the heart, not just with the head." Caleb, now 12 years old, continued to be an exceptional child in his capacity for empathy and leadership. He had created a group at school to help classmates facing family difficulties, informally applying the lessons he had learned through his own experience. Sometimes I think about what my life would be like if you hadn't left me in the town square, Caleb said to Sarah during one of their nightly conversations. And I think it would be a normal life without problems, but also without all the amazing things that happened afterward. Sarah smiled, understanding her son's feeling perfectly. You wouldn't miss things you never knew, she said, but I'm glad our story happened the way it did, even with all the pain it caused at the beginning. Because now we know we can overcome anything, replied Caleb, and we can help other people discover that too. On a September morning, 4 years after being left at the town square, Sarah woke with a deep feeling of gratitude and fulfillment. She looked around the apartment they had managed to buy 6 months before. 2 comfortable bedrooms, a spacious living room, a kitchen where the whole extended family fit for Sunday meals. Caleb was in the kitchen making breakfast, a responsibility he had spontaneously taken on and performed with pride. Julie was feeding Hope breakfast, talking to the girl about the day's plans. Martha had arrived early to help with an emergency situation, a new family that needed immediate support. "Good morning, family," said Sarah, hugging each person present. It was a morning ritual that never lost its magic, even after all these years. "Good morning, Mom," replied Caleb, pouring coffee for her. "Did Aunt Marty bring news about that new family?" Martha told them about the case, a single mother with 3 children who had lost her job and was about to be evicted. The situation was urgent, but not impossible. They had faced similar cases dozens of times and knew exactly how to proceed. "I'll talk to Mr. Bennett about work for her," said Sarah, "and we can use the emergency fund to help with the first few weeks' rent. I can take care of her children while she looks for a job," offered Julie. "Hope loves playing with older kids." Caleb thought for a moment before making his contribution. "At my school there's a clothing and school supplies donation drive. I can get things for the children." Martha smiled, seeing how naturally the whole family mobilized to help a new crisis situation. "You know you've become professionals at this, right? Helping families has become second nature to you." "I don't think it's work," replied Sarah. "I think it's just what we do out of love, like a big family taking care of each other." That afternoon they received a call that would once again change the course of their lives. It was from a television producer who had read the academic study about their case and wanted to make a documentary about their story. "It wouldn't just be about you," the producer explained during the call. "It would be about how a family overcame a terrible crisis and used that experience to help hundreds of other families. It's a story of hope that the whole country needs to hear." Sarah was hesitant initially. Exposing their story on national television would mean losing the privacy they had managed to maintain, even with all the public work they did. But it would also mean reaching millions of people who could benefit from their message of hope. "Can we think about this as a family?" asked Sarah. "This is a decision that affects all of us." The producer agreed to give them time to consider the proposal. That night, they sat in the living room for a family conversation about the pros and cons of participating in the documentary. Caleb, surprisingly, was the most enthusiastic about the idea. "Mom, how many people will watch on TV? Millions. Imagine how many families could be helped if millions of people know our story." Julie also supported it, but with caution. As long as it's done respectfully, showing the truth about the difficulties, but also about the hope. Martha, always practical, pointed out potential problems. "You need to be prepared to lose a bit of your private life, and also to receive criticism from people who don't understand the circumstances that led to the abandonment." Sarah spent several days thinking about the proposal. She spoke with Dr. Harrison, with Mr. Bennett, with people who attended the support groups. Most encouraged her to accept, arguing that her story could inspire people across the country. The final decision came during a visit to the cave in the woods, a place that remained special for the whole family. Sitting in the spot where Sarah and Caleb had reunited 4 years earlier, she asked her son what he really thought about exposing their lives on television. "Mom," said Caleb seriously, "remember when you left me at the town square and wrote in the note that it was for my own good, even though it hurt you a lot?" "I remember." Maybe telling our story on TV is similar. It will hurt a little to lose our privacy, but it will be for the good of many other families who need to know there is hope. The boy's analogy touched Sarah deeply. It was true. Sometimes doing the right thing requires personal sacrifices, but the benefits for other people can justify those sacrifices. "You're right," said Sarah. "If our story can prevent even one family from going through the desperation we went through, it's worth telling the whole country." They agreed to participate in the documentary, but with conditions. It would be filmed mainly in their town. It would show not only their personal story, but also the work they had developed, and it would include testimonies from other families they had helped. The filming took 3 months to complete. The television crew spent weeks living with the family, following their routine, filming support group meetings, interviewing people who had been touched by their story. Caleb, initially shy in front of the cameras, soon got used to it and became one of the most natural interviewees. His ability to explain complex concepts simply, his emotional maturity, his obvious happiness and stability, all of it offered visual proof that stories of abandonment can have happy endings. "What would you say to a child going through the same situation you went through?" asked the director during one of the interviews. "I would say, don't give up," Caleb replied without hesitation. "Even when everything seems impossible, there are always good people in the world willing to help. And most importantly, being abandoned doesn't mean you are not loved. Sometimes it means exactly the opposite." The documentary aired on a Sunday night, prime time, to a large audience. Sarah, Caleb, Julie, Hope and Martha watched together in their apartment living room, nervous but proud of the final result. The program showed their complete story: the abandonment, Caleb's lonely search, the meeting in the cave, the reunion at the cemetery, the rebuilding of the family, the expansion of the support work to other families. But more than that, it showed how love, persistence and community can transform personal tragedies into a source of hope for many people. The response was immediate and overwhelming. In the hours following the program, they received hundreds of phone calls, emails and messages from people who had identified with their story. Some were mothers in a situation of desperation similar to what Sarah had lived through. Others were abandoned children searching for their families. Many were people who simply wanted to thank them for sharing their experience. "You saved my life," wrote one woman. "I was planning to abandon my children tomorrow because I thought they would be better off without me. After seeing the program, I understood that what they need is their mother, even an imperfect mother who is going through difficulties. For 10 years I have been searching for my mother who abandoned me when I was 8 years old," wrote a young man. "Seeing your story gave me hope that maybe she didn't abandon me for lack of love, and that perhaps it's still possible for us to meet." The messages kept arriving for weeks. Each one represented a life touched, a family with new hope, a person who had decided not to give up because of the story they had shared. More important than the national recognition was what began happening in other cities across the country. People inspired by the documentary began creating their own support groups for families in crisis, using the principles that Sarah and Martha had developed. "It's happening exactly what we hoped for," said Martha, showing a stack of letters from people asking for guidance to create similar groups in their cities. "Our story is planting seeds of hope in places we never imagined reaching." Sarah was impressed by the national reach her personal story had achieved. But more than that, she was moved by the realization that family problems similar to those they had faced existed in every corner of the country. "We weren't so unique after all," she commented to Caleb one night, after reading another pile of letters from people sharing their own stories of abandonment and family reunification. "There are thousands of families going through the same difficulties we went through. But now they know they're not alone," Caleb replied, "and they know it's possible to overcome because they saw that we managed." 6 months after the documentary aired, Sarah received an invitation that left her deeply moved. The national government wanted consultation from her and Martha to develop public policies to support families in crisis, based on the approach they had developed. "You've proven that methods based on lived experience and personal relationships are more effective than purely bureaucratic approaches," explained the coordinator, who extended the invitation. "We want to incorporate these principles into government programs." Sarah was honored but also worried. "Our work functions because it's personal, because it's based on genuine love," she said. "How do we ensure that doesn't get lost when it becomes public policy?" The concern was valid. They had often seen how good intentions can be lost in government bureaucracy, but they also recognized that working with the government could exponentially multiply the reach of their approach. After much reflection and family conversations, they decided to accept the invitation, but with clear conditions. They would participate as consultants, not as employees. They would maintain their independence to criticize aspects of programs that didn't work. And most importantly, they would continue their direct work with families in their own community. The consulting work took them to New York City several times over the following year. Sarah, who 5 years earlier was a desperate woman sleeping in town squares, was now in meetings at the national government, helping develop policies that could affect millions of American families. "Sometimes I can't believe where life has brought me," Sarah said to Martha during one of their trips to the capital. "From a woman who abandoned her own son out of desperation to someone helping create national family support policies." "It's the power of personal transformation," Martha replied. "When you truly overcome a difficulty, you gain credibility and wisdom to help others facing similar hardships." The government program resulting from their consultation was launched 1 year later, with pilots in 50 cities across the country. The program combined traditional professional support with community support networks based on the model Sarah and Martha had developed. Caleb, now 13 years old, had become an informal spokesperson of sorts for the initiative, participating in events where his presence offered living proof that the methods worked. His ability to articulate complex concepts in an accessible way impressed audiences of all ages. "What you did wasn't just saving our family," Caleb said during one of the talks. "It was creating a model that can save thousands of other families. And the coolest part is that it started with just love and determination." Julie, now in her second year of psychology, began writing her thesis on the experience of growing up in a family rebuilt through community support networks. Her academic work was offering a unique perspective on the long-term effects of the approaches her family had pioneered. "I'm scientifically studying something I lived through in practice," explained Julie. "It's fascinating to see how our personal experience connects with psychological theories about resilience, attachment, and child development." Hope, now 4 years old, was growing up in an environment where helping other families was a natural part of daily life. She played with children who arrived at the support groups, offered her toys to younger children, and showed from an early age the generosity that characterized the whole family. "It's amazing how she already understands that some families go through tough times and need help," observed Sarah. "To her, it's normal. She's growing up knowing that taking care of each other is what people do." Martha, now nationally recognized as a pioneer in community approaches to family crises, continued to keep her focus on direct work. The cave in the woods was still maintained as a refuge. It still received children in emergency situations. It was still the symbolic heart of everything they had built. "No matter how big our work becomes," Martha said during one of her reflections, "the essence will always be one person caring for another in their moment of greatest need. That can never change." On a fall afternoon, 5 years after the abandonment in the town square, Sarah was organizing correspondence when she found a letter that made her stop everything she was doing. It was from a woman from another state, telling a story that perfectly echoed her own experience. The woman had abandoned her 7-year-old son 6 months earlier, consumed by depression and despair after losing her job and home. She had watched the documentary about Sarah and Caleb and decided to seek help instead of continuing to run from her problems. Through a local organization inspired by their work, she had gotten psychological treatment and was preparing to reunite with her son. "Your story saved me," the woman wrote. "It showed me that what I did didn't make me a monster, but a desperate mother who made a terrible decision out of misdirected love. And most importantly, it showed me there was still hope to win back my son and rebuild our family." The letter made Sarah cry, but they were tears of deep gratitude. Her decision to publicly share the most painful story of her life was literally saving other families. The suffering she had gone through had not been in vain. "Caleb, come see this," called Sarah. The boy, now a tall and confident teenager, read the letter with growing attention. "Mom," he said after finishing reading. Do you realize how many families our story has already helped? This woman, all the people who write to us, all the organizations that started after the documentary. Sometimes it's hard to believe, Sarah replied. When we were going through those terrible moments, I never imagined that one day it could help other people. Maybe that was the reason for everything from the beginning, reflected Caleb with a maturity that constantly surprised Sarah. Perhaps we had to go through that to be able to help all these other families. That evening, during the family dinner, Sarah shared the letter with everyone. The table was full as always. Sarah, Caleb, Julie, Hope, Martha, and also Mr. Bennett, who had officially become part of the family years before. Every time we receive a letter like this, said Martha, I remember why we do this work. It's not for the recognition or the awards you've been receiving. It's for stories like this one. Julie, who was feeding Hope, stopped to comment, You know I'm going to spend my whole life studying and working with families because of you, right? My daughter is going to grow up knowing it's possible to turn pain into purpose. Mr. Bennett, always the most practical of the group, made an observation that perfectly summed up everyone's feeling. You took the worst thing that could happen to a family and turned it into the best thing you could do for other families. That's a miracle, even if it's a miracle made with a lot of hard work. Caleb smiled at the man who had become a father figure in his life. Mr. Bennett, remember when you told me I had impressive inner strength? I think we all have it. We just need people who believe in us to discover it. The teenager's observation touched everyone at the table. It was true. Each person present had discovered strengths they didn't even know they possessed, but only because other people had believed in them during the most difficult times. After dinner, as everyone helped clean up, Sarah found herself watching her family with deep gratitude. 5 years earlier, she was a desperate woman who had committed the most unthinkable act for a mother. Today, she was surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally and sharing a life dedicated to helping other families. What are you thinking about? Asked Martha, noticing Sarah's distant look. About how strange life is, replied Sarah. How our greatest tragedy became our greatest blessing. How the moment I most failed as a mother ended up teaching me to be the mother Caleb really needed. Martha smiled, understanding the feeling perfectly. Sometimes we need to get completely lost to truly find ourselves, and sometimes we need to break completely to rebuild ourselves stronger. And sometimes, added Caleb, who had overheard the conversation, we need to go through bad things to discover how many good people there are in the world and to become good people for others. That night, Sarah stayed on the apartment balcony, looking at the stars and reflecting on everything they had lived through and achieved. In 5 years, they had gone from a situation of absolute despair to a life of purpose, love, and fulfillment. More than that, they had transformed their personal pain into a source of hope for thousands of other people. Their story was being told in universities, replicated in dozens of cities, inspiring public policies, saving families they would never meet in person. Caleb appeared on the balcony, bringing 2 cups of tea, another ritual they had developed over the years. Mom, he said, sitting beside her, if you could send a message to the woman who wrote that letter today, what would you say? Sarah thought carefully before answering. I would say that the love that led her to leave her son is the same love that can lead her back to him, that mistakes don't define who we are forever, and that it's never too late to start over, as long as we're willing to do the necessary work. And I would say, added Caleb, that children who were left out of love can understand and forgive when the truth is explained with care. That we just want our family back, no matter what happened before. Sitting together on the porch, mother and son looked toward the future with confidence and hope. They had learned that family is something built every day, through conscious choices of love, forgiveness, and mutual dedication. You know what makes me happiest, Caleb, said Sarah. It's that our story isn't just about the 2 of us. It's about our whole extended family and about all the families we're still going to help. And about all the children who will never be abandoned because their mothers read our story and decided to seek help instead of giving up, replied Caleb. They stayed on the porch late into the night, talking about future plans, about new projects to help more families, about how to always keep alive the essence of the work they had developed. Genuine love, hope based on real experience, and the conviction that it's always possible to start over. End of story. This was a fictional story created to touch our hearts. Now tell us what you thought. Do you believe Sarah made the right decision by telling her story publicly? Leave your opinion in the comments with sincere words. We would love to read your perspective on how families can overcome crises and rebuild stronger.